Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Super Bowl edition of the Off the Charts Football Podcast. I'm your host, Spratt. I work for Sports Info Solutions, and I am joined, as always, by Aaron Schatz from Football Outsiders. Aaron, we've got a lot to discuss related to the Super Bowl, so I just kind of want to dive in there. We'll probably get some pithy commentary from you about the Patriots as we go, but I want to start with sort of what I feel is the prevailing narrative about the Super Bowl, which is that, at least according to DVOA, this is the number one offense against the number two offense. And when you hear that, it sounds like it's a really evenly matched Super Bowl. But obviously offense isn't the only thing that happens here. So could you talk a little bit about whether either of these teams are differentiating themselves from the other with defense, with special teams, and what the implications are of that?
Yeah, I mean, special teams-wise, the two teams were fairly equal during the season. So the Patriots were 7th, and the Falcons were 8th. The weighted special teams, the Patriots go up a little bit and the Falcons go down a little bit, but the Falcons going down is mostly related to Devin Hester's last gasp, which is not a thing that's going to be a problem in the Super Bowl.
Right.
The Patriots going up is more more important because it's mostly Stephen Gostkowski getting his head screwed on straight, or from reports, his back screwed on straight. But they're pretty equal on special teams. Both kickers are good. The difference is defense. And the fact is, yes, has the Falcons' defense been better over the last few weeks? Yes. But the Patriots' defense was better than the Falcons' defense, even after you adjust for schedule, for the whole year. It has been gradually getting better all year, not just in the last few weeks. And even when the Falcons have been playing better on defense in the last few weeks, the Patriots have been even better. And a lot of the schedule effects in this for these teams this year were the same because they both played the NFC West. So both teams, the offenses played harder schedules than average, although the Falcons' schedule was harder. And both teams played easier schedules than average on defense, although the Patriots' schedule was a little bit easier than what the Falcons faced. But for people who think, oh, well, the Patriots' defense is overrated because of the defenses they played, guess what? I mean, because of the quarterbacks they played. Guess what? The Falcons played a lot of those same quarterbacks.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, you see the percentages in DVOA, and they look pretty big. Overall, the Patriots are at 40.8%, and the Falcons are at 24.3%. Weighted DVOA.
And that makes a big difference because that gets rid of the first month of the season. It gets rid of Garoppolo and Brissett. Mm-hmm. But also, the Patriots' defense has improved really significantly since the first month of the season. That's, correlation, not causation. I doubt that it's because Brady was suspended, but there's no doubt this defense has been much better if you take off the first month of the season.
And so just when you hear those numbers out loud, it just sounds like the Patriots are a lot better than the Falcons. But what has DVOA historically said about teams with that kind of differential between them? Do you think the Patriots should be favored by more than the 3 points? Or what do you expect the percent chance the Patriots would win this game would be, given those differences?
Yes. We came out with 4 points.
Okay, yeah, so not too bad.
Right, but it's not like a huge difference. I mean, the difference in DVOA seems large, but the fact is that the NFL is very random in the results. Very good teams lose to pretty good teams all the time in the NFL. It's a neutral site, right? Nobody's at home.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So we end up with the Patriots winning 59% of simulations, and we have the projected line as Patriots by 4.
Yeah. So, I mean, that sounds like it could be a really compelling game, which is something we could definitely use after most of the dud playoff games to point. I want to kind of head back to something that you brought up in talking about the defensive differences between these two teams, which is that both of them have played better defensively of late. And in particular, you had a really good table about this in your DVOA article from, I guess you wrote it last week, but looking toward the Super Bowl, where both teams from weeks 16 to 20 had their best stretch of defensive DVOA. Atlanta at negative 11.6%, and remember that negative for defensive DVOA is better than average. And New England at negative 20.4%. We've talked a lot about how recent trends don't necessarily mean more or predict better than overall season trends, But I wanted to ask you whether you thought there were any factors, maybe with personnel or anything else, that could be the reasons why these teams would be playing better, and maybe an indication that these are real trends that you could see kind of manifest in the Super Bowl itself.
Yeah, it is hard to figure out with the Falcons, I'm going to admit here. It is difficult to figure out what exactly has improved. You know, we were trading a couple of numbers on email getting ready for the podcast, and what happens to the Falcons' pressure rate depends on what week you cut it.
Yeah, this was hilarious.
So when I looked at the Falcons' defense improving, I spotted week 13, I believe, as the week. Week 14 is the first week that I wanted to track as the improved defense, because week 13 was the last week of having a pretty bad defense. And when you break pressure rate down into weeks 1 through 13 compared to 14 through 20, there's basically no change in where the Falcons are ranked. But if you break it down into 4 5-week periods, there's a huge change.
Yeah.
They're ranked 20th or something for weeks 1 to 10, and then 6th in 11 through 15, and then 15th in 16 through 20. And this does demonstrate one of the problems with doing football analytics, which is that everything is based on 16 games, and even though there are more plays in a football game than there are in a baseball game, you don't get to like reset the mood of the game every 8 minutes or something, right? The way you do in baseball, where you all get to go to sleep and come back the next day. So the Atlanta trend as far as pressure rate is almost entirely based on one game when they played Atlanta. When they played Arizona,
week 12,
getting the two A teams mixed up. When Atlanta stomped Arizona in week 12, and they basically had Carson Palmer under pressure like almost every down.
Yeah.
So you take that game out, and essentially Atlanta has had a slightly below average pressure rate all year.
Which is really weird, in part because Vic Beasley himself seems to have become this like big story, and become, I guess he led the league in sacks this year. So everyone at this point in the year is recognizing what kind of a great impact of a player he's been on defense. It's kind of interesting because his sack numbers are actually pretty similar from the first half to the second half. I think he had 9.5 through the first 10 weeks, and then 6 in the 9 or so weeks since then. But considering that also includes the bye and everything else, the rates are pretty similar. But interestingly, Beasley himself has seen his pressure rate increase over the second half, even if the overall team hasn't sort of benefited in pressure rate because of that. So yeah, I mean, it's like you said, it's interesting how the numbers can look so different when you split them up in different ways. And it's not really clear that pressure is the reason the Falcons have improved defensively over the last several weeks, even though it's manifesting in the DVOA numbers.
So you say, okay, what is it? It's the secondary. All right, so we broke down the cornerback coverage numbers for weeks 1 through 13 versus 14 and afterwards. Robert Alford has improved significantly. First 13 weeks allowed 7.5 yards per pass, 51% success rate. Since week 14, including the playoffs, only 5.2 yards per pass, 62% rate. Except Desmond Trufant got injured, and Jalen Collins and Brian Poole have been much worse than Trufant was.
Right. So
the improvement from Alford is balanced by decline with the other cornerback position. And then the broken tackles have improved slightly from 24th in percentage of plays with broken tackles to 20th over the last 7 weeks, but that's not a huge improvement. So it's really weird to kind of figure out what exactly has gotten better. Now, one of the things that's also true is the pass defense in the regular season improved significantly in the second half of the year. The run defense collapsed. They had the worst run defense in the league from week 10 to 17. It was much better in the playoff games, the 2 playoff games, but I do think that the Patriots have a much better offensive line than either Seattle or Green Bay, with everybody so injured that a defensive lineman had to come in to play guard.
Definitely, yes. So yeah, I mean, it's almost like what we were talking about with the Steelers last week, where DVOA is showing the defensive improvements, but it's hard to look at one specific facet of the defense and say, that is the thing to hang their hats on, that is what you should look for in the Super Bowl for them to succeed.
I mean, from a scouting perspective, speed, right? There's been more speed, safeties, right? I looked at cornerback charting stats here. Safeties are very difficult to measure with stats. Linebackers being a little faster, safeties, but it's really difficult. The pass pressure is, it's not like there's suddenly a lot of it. Vic Beasley's been good all year. The pass rush has been basically two guys, Vic Beasley and Dwight Freeney with some Adrian Claiborne, but Claiborne's injured now. So it's hard to tell exactly what happened.
Well, with the Patriots trying to figure out the thing that's been responsible for their defensive improvement, we've talked about this a little bit before, but the improvement does correspond in time with when they traded away Jamie Collins. And
although actually, I will interrupt and say what it really corresponds with is about 4 weeks after they traded Jamie Collins.
Right. So
because the Patriots have a couple of bad defensive games in there in the first couple of weeks after they traded Collins. And then about a month, right, there's like the Seattle game where they gave up a ton in week 10.
Yeah, you're right.
And then, obviously they played really bad teams, really bad defenses, but it was about a month after they traded Collins that the defense really kicks into gear.
So Rivers McCown, your colleague at Football Outsiders, had a really interesting article on ESPN Insider this week talking about which players that hadn't been used a lot throughout the season that could be breakout players in the Super Bowl. And one of the guys he mentioned is a guy we've talked about a little bit related to the Collins move, is a Landon Roberts, the linebacker. The cool stat that he had there was that Roberts missed just 7.4% of his tackles this year. And that's actually much better than Jamie Collins, who missed 19.3% of his tackles. But what was interesting was, if you look at splits before and after the Collins trade, the Patriots' broken tackle rate defensively didn't really change that much. And in fact, sort of the other piece to this puzzle, which is Kyle Van Noy, who's the other linebacker they traded for when they traded away Collins.
Yes, one of the most confusing players in the league to me, a man with a Dutch last name who went to Brigham Young University and is African-American. I am so confused.
It is really confusing. Anyway, also confusing is the fact that he has a 29.3% broken tackle rate, which is the second highest among any linebacker with 20 or more tackles this year. So it's like they're using multiple linebackers to try to make up for the loss of Collins. Roberts is really good at making tackles in open space. Van Noy is really bad at it. The net is not really much change. So I'm not sure we've really figured out why the Patriots got better defensively either.
Well, it's interesting because it sort of depends, again, on where you split things. If you split things with the Collins trade, the Patriots have a similar rate of plays with broken tackles before and after the trade. But if you split it a couple weeks later, it's clear that there is a massive improvement. The fact is that looking at the table of broken tackles by team defense, which is available in the premium charting stats that we get through from Sports Info Solutions that you can get on Football Outsiders. The fact is that for a long part of the season, the Patriots were near the bottom of the league in percentage plays with a broken tackle, as in there were so many of them.
Right.
And historically, the Patriots are one of the best tackling teams in the league. It's like, what the heck is going on here? Well, it's changed. Week 1 to 12, the Patriots had a broken tackle on 10.6% of plays. That's 28th. Week 13 to 20, 7.9% of plays, which is 10th.
Wow, that's a huge
much
improvement.
Closer to what they've done historically. And that cannot be blamed on the bad offenses they were playing during that time, because bad quarterback doesn't necessarily mean offenses that don't break tackles. Baltimore was near the top of the league in broken tackles this year. Miami breaks a lot of tackles. The Jets break a good amount of tackles. The Rams break a good amount of tackles. So it's not that the Patriots suddenly were having fewer broken tackles because they were playing bad offenses. The tackling got better.
And it may be kind of related to Roberts himself. Like if he was getting more integrated in the offense over the month or whatever after the Collins trade, maybe that does sort of explain what's been going on there, and also explains that the blip of bad defense right after the Collins trade before things got really good for the Patriots down the stretch.
And there's other things as well. I think you're seeing Ninkovic's return from suspension. I think you're seeing Eric Rowe playing more rather than the other cornerbacks. Like I can't remember the name of who played before him, but Logan Ryan moved into the slot. Eric Rowe became the outside cornerback. So, that's led to a lot of improvements in things. And Malcolm Butler playing better both coverage and tackling. Butler, weeks 1 to 12, 8.2 yards allowed per play, 52% success rate. Since week 13, including the playoffs, 5.1 yards allowed per play, 69% success rate. So the Patriots are getting better coverage on both outside cornerback positions, and Ryan's been fantastic move to the slot.
Yeah. Okay, I think there are a few other specific players that we want to talk about for this matchup. And I want to start with Chris Hogan, who had just an absolutely huge game in the AFC Championship. He had 9 catches for 180 yards and 2 touchdowns. He was targeted 12 times in that game, which is 5 more targets than he had had in any game this season. And I didn't look this up, but I'm pretty confident it's probably 5 more than he's ever had in any game in his career. Aaron, why do you think Hogan was suddenly like the featured Patriots receiver? Has he secretly been, this good all along? Or was there something maybe about the Steelers' defense that led to him having this big day?
Well, I can answer the thing about him being this good all along. Hogan is a really interesting cat because, right, we all know the story. He played college lacrosse.
Yes,
he only played 1 year of football. So it took him a while to learn how to play football. He was a practice squad guy his first year in the league. 3 years with Buffalo, had a below-average DVOA every season. But the Patriots saw in him that when you put him in their offense with Tom Brady at quarterback, that he would excel, and he has. But it's not like this guy was a hidden gem in Buffalo. He was a really hidden gem because he wasn't that productive. As far as why they threw to him, I think he was the open guy. I mean, the Patriots' strategy is throw to the open guy. But I know you have some very interesting charting stuff that shows perhaps why Hogan was the open guy.
Yeah, this is going to be a little bit dense, but I'll try to keep it as sort of simple as I can here. I just want to point out that 6 of Hogan's 12 targets and 117 of his 180 yards came against the Steelers' cover 3 defense. And for the season, Hogan had 257 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 14.3 yards per target, a very high number, against cover 3 defenses. So cover 3, it's a zone-type defense. And the thing that is sort of appealing about using that type of defense against the Patriots is they have so many shifty players like, Edelman, Amendola, Dion Lewis. Those guys are really good at beating man coverage. So the Steelers decided to run a lot of cover 3 zone defense against the Patriots, and that makes a lot of sense for them. But Hogan himself is a guy that has thrived against those zone defenses. And I think you saw it a little bit in the game, even if you weren't quite sure what you were seeing, where he was sort of finding those soft spots in the zone and getting open there.
Yeah, something about the Steelers cover 3, Brady knows.
Yeah.
We've been doing this now. I mean, the Steelers have run the same scheme now for 15, 20 years. And Brady always destroys them. So whatever Brady does against other cover 3s like Seattle's, against what Pittsburgh does, which is the cover 3 out of that 3-4 with the zone blitzes and the stuff that they do, he knows where the holes are, and he knows where the zone blitzes are coming from, and he just beats it every freaking time.
So interestingly, for the full season, Brady was, his second worst self against that type of coverage, the cover 3. The type of coverage that he's been the worst against this season, and it's by a lot, is man cover 2. He had just a 67.9 rating against that, and against all other types of coverages, he was over a 95 rating. Man cover 2 is, as you can probably tell by the name, is a man-to-man defense. And it's set up where 2 safeties are responsible for any deep routes on their half of the field. They basically split the field in half and cover those deep routes. The reason that really works is because all of the cornerbacks that are playing man-to-man coverage, they can go and aggressively jam receivers at the line and try to disrupt their timing and try to just prevent them from getting off the line because they know they have that deep help. And that's actually something that really works nicely for the Patriots, whose offense is, very dependent on the timing of routes and has smaller type receivers that bigger corners can sort of muscle the way around. Interestingly, the Steelers just didn't really run any man cover 2 this year, and when they did, they weren't particularly effective with it. But the Falcons, they didn't run it a lot more than the Steelers, but they were very effective with it. They limited opposing quarterbacks to a 67.4 quarterback rating against that coverage, kind of similar to what Brady himself did against the coverage. So it's kind of a long way of saying that I'm not sure the Steelers had the right personnel to use the best type of defensive coverage for the Patriots, but the Falcons might. And so try to look for that type of coverage as something they may use heavily in this game.
Now, my response to that would be that I think that is definitely good for shutting down the outside I think where they're going to have problems is the slot and the running backs, because Atlanta was top 10 DVOA against number 1 and number 2 receivers. They were 29th against what we call other receivers. Now, that's not always people coming from the slot. And one of the things that we hope to do in future years with the help of the SIS charting is to track not just ones, twos, and others, but left, right, and slot.
Yeah.
But a lot of times that's the slot, and that's Brian Poole. And Brian Poole is a really nice story as an undrafted free agent who became a starter in his first year as a nickelback. But he's not a particularly good nickelback right now. He's still very inexperienced. And the other thing is the linebackers, yeah, they're fast, but there's trouble covering running backs. 26th in the league in DVOA against running backs in the passing game. The Falcons faced, now this is not a raw number, this is an adjusted for opponent number, but the Falcons faced more passes and more receiving yards per game with running backs. 9.1 passes, 53.5 receiving yards after opponent adjustments. More than any other team in the league. And that's not a good thing to be trying to cover James White and Dion Lewis man-to-man on the outside if your linebackers cannot cover running backs in the passing game.
And I think that really jibes with what we're talking about with the scheme stuff here. Because during the regular season, slot receiver Julian Edelman saw 16 targets against man cover 2. James White saw 9. And no other receiver on the Patriots saw more than 4. It wasn't.
Oh my God, that James White wheel route! They want to, if they bring out man 2, that James White wheel route will kill them. They'll run some route on that side that's going to clear the deep safety into the middle, and White will go around, and the linebacker won't keep up with them, and they'll get 35 yards out of it.
Yeah, so I guess I would say fantasy owners take note. This could have implications about which Patriots.
Like daily
start.
fantasy.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, the next guy I wanted to talk about, Aaron, was Falcons center Alex Mack, because he injured his ankle in the NFC Championship game. So, he's very much expected to play in the Super Bowl, but we're not sure how effective he'll be. In your mind, how critical a piece is he to what the Falcons are doing in the running game and just overall offensively?
Super critical. I mean, a lot of people, when I asked, it's funny, I did for ESPN the most improved units year to year over the last 25 years with DVOA. And the Falcons are the only one of the top dozen improved offenses that did not either have a different quarterback or a different offensive coordinator than the year before. So what's been the difference? Well, there are improvements at the receiver positions. Mohamed Sanu instead of the last gasp of Roddy White, and Austin Hooper instead of just Levine Toilolo, who's more of a blocker.
Yeah.
But the real personnel difference here is Alex Mack. And I think it's 3 years ago, Cleveland had an absurdly good start on offense. They were like top 5 offensive DVOA through 6 weeks, with Shanahan as the offensive coordinator, and then Alex Mack broke his leg, and that offense fell apart without Mack. Now, he's not that important by himself. Other things happened there, I'm sure, but he is hugely important and a big part of this game, and he better be as healthy as they can possibly make him. Tape that thing up as much as you can, or whatever doctors do, and I'm not going to pretend to know how it all works. It's not the area of my expertise, but Alex Mack is critically important for Atlanta to win the Super Bowl.
Yeah, in that same Rivers McCown article that I mentioned earlier on ESPN, he mentioned that the Falcons were the 4th in adjusted line yards on middle runs this season. So it's the kind of thing where he's making those blocks, the Falcons have been really effective. And where the Patriots are 13th in adjusted line yards defending those middle runs, maybe they'll have more of an even playing field there, or even an advantage if Mack isn't his full self there. Okay, one last guy that I wanted to talk about, Aaron, and I'm kind of getting there slowly, but let's start by talking about Antonio Brown from last week's matchup and how that might relate to Julio Jones this week. The Patriots held Antonio Brown to 7 catches for 77 last week, which, that sounds pretty low for Brown, but it also was probably a little bit deceptive because he had just 11 yards over the first 20 or so minutes. Can't quite remember specifically, but they were shutting him down early, and then when the score got a little bit more out of hand, he did some more extra work late. So do you think whatever the Patriots were doing to limit Brown's success is something they can use to limit Julio Jones' success? Or are the Falcons maybe better equipped to either spread the ball around to multiple receivers or for Jones himself to sort of handle what the Patriots were doing there defensively?
Well, they're definitely equipped to spread the ball around to lots of receivers. Vince Verhey did his breakdown of the Falcons' worst games this year, and the interesting thing he discovered is that if you look at the Falcons' losses, Julio Jones generally got his. It's Sanu and Gabriel and Hooper that got shut down, not Julio Jones and not the running backs, which is sort of interesting. And some of the talk around Boston sports radio and with the Boston writers has been that not to expect Malcolm Butler to play one-on-one against Julio Jones the way he did against Antonio Brown, and it's because of the type of receivers that they are. Malcolm Butler is 5'11", 190. Antonio Brown is 5'10", 180. Julio Jones is 6'4", 220.
Slightly different.
Slightly different. So I would expect that instead you're going to see Malcolm Butler on Sanu, because that also jives with the idea of that the best way to beat them is to shut down the other options, knowing that Julio Jones is going to make plays no matter what, but stop everyone else from making plays. Eric Rowe is 6'1", 205. That's not as big as Julio, but closer. So you put Rowe on Julio, with McCourty doubling over the top generally, or Deron Harmon, especially if they want to bring out what they do a lot is a dime set with 3 corners and 3 safeties, where Patrick Chung is kind of in a Deion Buchanan-y role, or covering a tight end man-to-man, and then McCourty and Harmon are deep. So if you double Jones, you have Butler shut down Sanu, and the way Butler's played the last few weeks, he probably could do that. And then it's, I guess, Logan Ryan with Taylor Gabriel a lot of the time. I think that does what you want to do, which is stops Julio Jones from getting 200 yards.
Right.
And shut down Sanu and Gabriel as much as possible. And then the Patriots, they've had a strong run defense all year. I don't think Atlanta's going to be able to run all over them.
So the question that I would have, sort of piggybacking off of that then, is could the Falcons then have success throwing to their running backs? I know that's something that we talked a little bit last week about with Le'Veon Bell potentially doing, but he got hurt so early in that game, and that's not really a skill that D'Angelo Williams brings to the table like Bell does. The Falcons' backs are really good receivers. Is that sort of the weakness that they need to be exploiting against the Patriots?
Yeah, and I think, the Patriots, the DVOA versus receivers this year is pretty straight across the board, like average. It's a little better against number 2 receivers. It's a little worse against running backs. So I think absolutely that's something the Falcons want to take advantage of. And, basically just overall, number 1 receivers aside, every other option as a receiver for Atlanta is better than the equivalent from Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Sanu is better than Rodgers. Taylor Gabriel is better than Sammy Coates or Kobe Hamilton. Austin Hooper is probably maybe the same as Jesse James, but he's been pretty good this year. The running backs are better receivers than D'Angelo Williams. So, I have more confidence in Butler shutting down Sanu than I do in Ryan shutting down Gabriel. As good as Ryan's been in the slot this year, you put Gabriel outside, you run speed stuff with him, you could get big plays.
Well, I think that pretty much covers everything we have leading into the Super Bowl. So everyone that's been listening to this episode and to us all season, I want to thank you. Thanks so much for subscribing. Thanks so much for checking out the Football Outsiders premium charting data that we've been providing them. And still check it out if you haven't so far.
We definitely, it's going to be up all off season. Yep. Improved as we go back and rewatch things, and then we're going to have new categories next year. I'm really excited about the kinds of things we can do with it, and in the book next year too.
Definitely. We haven't really talked about our plans over the offseason, but we definitely are going to be recording some podcasts throughout the offseason. So keep your eye out for things, and we'll do our best to tweet things out when we're planning to do episodes. But again, thanks so much, and I hope everyone has a great time watching the Super Bowl.